In the sprawling expanse of the Andromeda Galaxy, humanity was a footnote in the cosmic ledger. Earth's first interstellar colony, Nova Terra, had been established decades ago but remained an afterthought to the dominant species of the sector, the Veil. These tall, shimmering beings with skin like liquid silver and voices that resonated like wind chimes viewed humans as little more than pests. To them, humanity's chaotic nature, its emotions, its unpredictability was proof of inferiority. The Veil were perfectionists, their society built on logic, precision, and cold calculation. They saw human art as frivolous noise, human laughter as meaningless chaos, and human dreams as pointless distractions from efficiency. Humans were tolerated only because they were useful for manual labor and menial tasks, not because they mattered. Nova Terra itself existed under strict oversight by the Veil Council, who monitored every move the colonists made. It wasn't colonization. It was occupation. Elias Kane, a young engineer stationed at Nova Terra's central hub, often found himself staring out of the observation deck at the stars beyond. He didn't know why he felt drawn to them, he just did. Maybe it was the way they twinkled faintly against the endless blackness, reminding him of hope amidst despair. Or maybe it was because those distant lights represented something unreachable, something free. Whatever the reason, Elias spent most nights gazing upward while his co-workers complained about their lot or drowned themselves in cheap synthetic alcohol. One evening, as Elias leaned against the glass dome of the observation deck, he noticed something unusual, a flicker near one of the outer moons. At first, he thought it might be a glitch in the station's sensors, but when he zoomed in using the telescope controls, his breath caught in his throat. There, hovering silently above, the moon's surface was a ship unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its design was sleek, yet jagged, almost insect-like, with glowing veins pulsing along its hull. It wasn't Veil, it couldn't be. But if it wasn't Veil, then what was it? Before Elias could process what he was seeing, alarms blared throughout the station. Red warning lights flashed, casting eerie shadows across the walls. "Unauthorized vessel detected," a robotic voice announced over the intercom. "All personnel report to lockdown positions immediately." Panic erupted around him as engineers scrambled to secure equipment and guards rushed to arm themselves. Elias hesitated, torn between following protocol and investigating further. Something about that ship tugged at him, whispering secrets he couldn't ignore. Against his better judgment, he slipped away from the chaos and headed toward the docking bay, where reports indicated the mysterious craft had landed. When he arrived, the scene was surreal. Dozens of armed Veil soldiers surrounded the ship, their weapons trained on the hatch as though expecting an invasion. Tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Then, without warning, the hatch hissed open. A figure stepped out, not monstrous or alien in the traditional sense, but undeniably otherworldly. She stood taller than any human, her body covered in iridescent scales that shifted colors with each movement. Her eyes glowed faintly, piercing through the dim light of the docking bay. Most striking of all was her expression or lack thereof. Her face was unreadable, devoid of emotion, as if she were carved from stone. "Who are you?" demanded the lead. "Veil Commander," his voice sharp and commanding. The woman tilted her head slightly, studying the assembled crowd before speaking in a voice that was both melodic and chilling. "I am Caliph of the Zern," she said, her words flowing smoothly despite their weight, "and I have come to deliver a message." "What message?" The commander snapped. Caliph's gaze swept over the room, pausing briefly on Elias before settling back on the Veil. "Your kind has ignored us for too long," she began, her tone calm but laced with steel. "You think yourselves superior, yet you squander resources and meddle in affairs that do not concern you. Your arrogance will be your undoing." Her words sent ripples through the crowd. Murmurs of confusion and anger spread among the Veil, while Elias felt a strange mix of awe and unease. Before anyone could respond, Caliph turned abruptly and locked eyes with him. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Her piercing stare bore into him, stripping away layers until she seemed to see straight into his soul. "You," she said softly, pointing directly at Elias, You reek of humanity, weakness, emotion." Her lip curled in disdain. "I despise your kind." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Elias, who froze under her scrutiny. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to find words, but none came. Instead, he simply stared back, unable to look away. Then, without another word, Caliph turned and strode back into her ship. The hatch sealed shut behind her, and within seconds, the vessel vanished into the void, leaving everyone stunned. As the Veil began barking orders and scrambling to analyze the encounter, Elias stood rooted to the spot, replaying her words in his mind. "I despise your kind." But there was something else in her voice, something she hadn't said, something hidden beneath the surface. And Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The days following Caliph's abrupt departure were tense. The Veil Council convened emergency meetings, dissecting every detail of her appearance and message. They debated endlessly about the Zerg. Were they allies, enemies, a threat to their dominance? Meanwhile, life on Nova Terra ground to a halt as paranoia spread among both the colonists and their overseers. Curfews were imposed, patrols increased, and surveillance tightened. Everyone was on edge. Elias Kane found himself at the center of it all, not because he had any answers, but because Caliph had singled him out. The Veil interrogated him repeatedly, demanding explanations for why she'd chosen to address him specifically. Elias could only shrug and say what everyone already knew: she hates humans. But deep down, Elias couldn't stop thinking about her. Her words haunted him, not just the insult, but the way she'd looked at him. There had been something in her gaze, something unreadable yet oddly familiar. Was it curiosity? Contempt? Or maybe pity? He couldn't tell, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. One evening, while most of the colony was under curfew, Elias decided to take a walk outside the main facility. The airlock hissed open, and he stepped into the cool night of Nova Terra. 2 moons hung low in the sky, casting silver light over the barren landscape. It was quiet here, far from the sterile corridors and constant scrutiny of the station. For once, Elias felt like he could breathe. As he wandered aimlessly, lost in thought, he heard a faint sound, a rhythmic tapping, almost like footsteps. At first, he assumed it was one of the patrol drones sent by the Veil, but when he turned toward the noise, his heart skipped a beat. Standing not 20 feet away was Caliph. She hadn't come in her ship this time. Instead, she seemed to have materialized out of thin air. Her iridescent scales shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and her glowing eyes locked onto him with unnerving intensity. Elias froze, unsure whether to run or stay put. "You're still here," she said finally, her voice carrying a strange mix of irritation and amusement. "Why?" Elias swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. "I live here," he replied cautiously. "This is my home." Caliph tilted her head, studying him as though he were some peculiar insect. "Home," she repeated slowly, testing the word. "You call this wasteland home?" "It's better than being told where to go and what to do," Elias shot back, before he could stop himself. Immediately, he regretted speaking so boldly. What if she took offense? What if she decided to vaporize him right then and there? To his surprise, Caliph didn't lash out. Instead, she laughed, a sharp, melodic sound that echoed across the empty plain. "Boldness," she mused. "Another flaw of your kind, foolishness disguised as courage." "I'm not afraid of you," Elias said, surprising even himself. With his own words. His voice shook slightly, but he held her gaze. "If you wanted to hurt me, you would have done it already." For a moment, Caliph looked genuinely intrigued. She stepped closer, towering over him now, her presence overwhelming. "And what makes you think I won't?" she asked softly. "Because you came back?" Elias countered. "If you hated us? As much as you claim, you wouldn't waste your time talking to me. You'd be gone." Caliph stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, a small, fleeting curve of her lips that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "Clever," she admitted, "for a human." Before Elias could respond, the ground beneath them trembled violently. Both of them stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden quake. In the distance, a massive plume of smoke rose into the sky, accompanied by the unmistakable roar of engines. Dozens of ship's Veil cruisers descended rapidly, surrounding the area with blinding searchlights. "Intruder detected!" A mechanical voice boomed through the night. "Surrender immediately!" Caliph let out a low, irritated growl. "They never learn," she muttered under her breath. Turning back to Elias, she added, "Your kind clings to false gods, believing they'll protect you. Tell me, human, do you trust them?" Elias hesitated. He didn't know how to answer. The Veil weren't exactly benevolent rulers, but they were all he'd ever known. Could he really side with an alien who openly despised humanity? Before he could decide, Caliph reached out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was firm but not painful, and the heat of her touch sent a jolt through his body. "Come with me," she said urgently. "If you want to understand, you must see for yourself." "What are you talking about?" Elias stammered, struggling to keep up as she began dragging him toward the horizon. "No more questions," Caliph snapped. "Not now. Trust me or don't, but choose quickly." Behind them, the Veil forces advanced, weapons primed and ready to fire. The choice was clear: stay and face certain capture or follow Caliph into the unknown. With a deep breath, Elias made his decision. He yanked his arm free and nodded. "Fine," he said. "Let's go." Caliph smirked, seemingly satisfied with his response. With a flick of her hand, a swirling portal of light erupted in front of them. Without hesitation, she stepped through, pulling Elias along with her. The last thing Elias saw before the world dissolved around him was the Veil commander shouting orders, his face twisted with rage. Then everything went white, and he felt himself falling into darkness, into uncertainty, into whatever fate awaited him next. When Elias opened his eyes, he was no longer on Nova Terra or anywhere remotely familiar. The world around him was a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes, shifting constantly like an oil slick under sunlight. The air shimmered with faint, crackling energy, and the ground beneath his feet felt solid yet strangely fluid, as if it might ripple away at any moment. "What? Where are we?" Elias stammered, looking around in awe and confusion. His voice echoed unnaturally, bouncing off invisible walls before fading into silence. "This is the Veil," Caliph replied, releasing her grip on his wrist. She stood tall and composed, her iridescent scales glowing faintly in the surreal light. A place between worlds, safe for now. Safe from what? Elias asked, still trying to process the bizarre environment. He glanced back over his shoulder, half expecting the Veil cruisers to appear out of nowhere. But there was nothing, just endless, fluctuating patterns stretching in every direction. Caliph turned to face him, her glowing eyes piercing through the haze. "From them," she said simply, nodding toward the distant memory of Nova Terra. "And from me." Elias frowned, unsure whether she meant herself as a threat or something else entirely. "Why did you bring me here? What do you want?" Caliph didn't answer immediately. Instead, she began pacing slowly, her movements graceful yet deliberate. "You humans are peculiar creatures," she mused aloud, more to herself than to him. "Fragile, reckless, driven by emotions that cloud your judgment. Yet somehow you survive, even thrive, where others fail." "That's not an answer," Elias pressed, growing frustrated. "If you hate us so much, why bother talking to me at all?" Caliph stopped mid-step and fixed him with a sharp look. "Because you intrigue me," she admitted reluctantly. "Despite everything, despite how illogical and self-destructive your species is, there's something about you I can't ignore. Something—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Resilient." Elias blinked, caught off guard by her admission. For someone who claimed to despise humanity, she sounded almost curious, maybe even impressed. Before he could respond, the landscape shifted abruptly. A new image materialized before them, a massive structure floating in the void, its surface covered in intricate carvings that pulsed with faint light. It looked ancient, otherworldly, and impossibly vast. "This is Zern Prime," Caliph explained, gesturing toward the structure. "The heart of my people's civilization. Few outsiders have ever seen it and lived to tell the tale." Elias stared at the alien monument, overwhelmed by its sheer scale and beauty. Why are you showing me this? He asked cautiously. Caliph crossed her arms, her expression hardening. Because understanding requires context. Your kind has meddled in galactic affairs for too long, blindly following the veil without question. They've fed you lies, manipulated you into submission, all while exploiting your resources and labor. You call them protectors, but they see you as tools, disposable ones. Elias clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He wanted to argue, to defend humanity's dignity, but deep down he knew she wasn't wrong. The Veil had always treated humans as inferior, unworthy of trust or autonomy. Still, hearing it laid bare like this stung. So what? He snapped. What does any of this have to do with me? Caliph stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Because you're different, you questioned their authority. You stood up to me when most would have cowered. That defiance, it's rare, dangerous, and it's exactly what my people need. Need for what? Elias demanded, his patience. Wearing thin. You keep saying these cryptic things, but you haven't told me anything useful. Caliph sighed, exasperated but also amused. Very well, she said. I'll show you. With a wave of her hand, the scene changed again. This time, they were standing inside what appeared to be a war room. Holographic maps floated in the air, displaying star systems marked with symbols Elias didn't recognize. Around them, dozens of Zern operatives bustled about, their movements precise and efficient. We are preparing for war, Caliph announced bluntly. Against the Veil, Elias's jaw dropped. War? Are you serious? You think humanity stands a chance against them? No, Caliph corrected sharply. Not humanity, us, my people. But we cannot win alone. We need allies, ones who understand the cost of freedom and are willing to fight for it. And you think humans are those allies? Elias asked skeptically, after everything you've said about us? Caliph smirked, a flicker of amusement crossing her otherwise stern features. I think you underestimate yourselves. Humans may be flawed, but your greatest strength lies in your ability to adapt, to endure, to hope even when all seems lost. That is a power the Veil will never comprehend. Elias shook his head, struggling to wrap his mind around what she was proposing. Even if we wanted to help, which I'm not saying we do, how could we possibly make a difference? We're outnumbered, outgunned, and completely dependent on the Veil for survival. Caliph's gaze softened, just slightly. But that's where you're wrong, she said quietly. You already have the tools you need. What you lack is purpose, unity, a reason to rise above your fears and doubts. As she spoke, another vision appeared, a hologram of Earth, vibrant and alive, surrounded by countless human colonies scattered across the stars. Despite the hardships and struggles, the images radiated resilience and determination. Elias felt a lump form in his throat as he realized what Caliph was trying to say. You want us to stand up to them, he murmured. To fight back. Caliph nodded. Yes, together we can dismantle their empire. Free not just your people, but ours as well? For a long moment, Elias said nothing. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. Could humanity really do this? Could they rise above centuries of oppression and reclaim their destiny? The idea seemed impossible, and yet somehow it also felt inevitable, finally. He looked up at Caliph, his resolve hardening. If I agree to this, what happens next? Her smile returned, colder this time, but tinged with respect. Next, she said, we prepare. And then we strike. The days that followed were a blur of activity and tension. Caliph had taken Elias to one of the Zern's hidden outposts, so sleek, labyrinthine structure buried beneath the surface of an unnamed moon. The outpost buzzed with life, its corridors alive with Zern operatives moving with purpose. They worked tirelessly, analyzing data, calibrating weapons, and strategizing for the coming conflict. To Elias, it felt like stepping into the heart of a storm. Chaotic yet strangely orchestrated, Caliph wasted no time in involving him directly. She introduced him to her council, a group of Zern leaders who regarded him with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. Some dismissed him outright, their disdain for humanity palpable. Others watched him carefully, as if trying to decipher some hidden code within him. But Caliph stood firm, insisting that Elias was key to their plans not because he was special, but because he represented something greater, humanity's untapped potential. Elias struggled to keep up. He wasn't a soldier or a strategist. He was just an engineer from Nova Terra, thrown into a situation far beyond his comprehension. Yet, despite his doubts, he found himself drawn into the mission. The more he learned about the Veil's exploitation of humanity, the angrier he became. And the more Caliph pushed him, the more he realized she was right. Humans could fight back. They had to. One evening, after hours of grueling discussions and simulations, Elias found himself alone in the outpost's observation deck. The room was dimly lit, its walls lined with holographic displays showing star maps and tactical projections. He leaned against the railing, staring at the swirling nebula outside the viewport. It was beautiful, but it offered little comfort. His mind raced with questions. Could humanity truly rise to the challenge, or was this all just wishful thinking? You look troubled. Caliph's voice startled him. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, her glowing eyes reflecting faintly off the glass. Her usual aloof demeanor was softened slightly, as if she sensed his inner turmoil. Just thinking, Elias replied, forcing a weak smile. About everything. Caliph stepped closer, joining him at the railing. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the colors of the nebula shift and dance. Then she spoke, her tone uncharacteristically gentle. You're wondering if your people are ready. Elias nodded, surprised by how easily she read him. Yeah, we've been under the Veil's thumb for so long. How do we even begin to stand up to them? Caliph tilted her head, considering his words. Strength isn't always measured by power or numbers, she said thoughtfully. Sometimes it's found in the smallest acts of defiance. A single spark can ignite a fire. Elias frowned, unsure what she meant. A spark? Like what? Instead of answering, Caliph reached into a compartment on her belt and pulled out a small device, a crystalline sphere no larger than a fist. Its surface shimmered faintly, catching the light in mesmerizing patterns. She held it out to him. This is a fragment of our technology, she explained. It contains knowledge blueprints, schematics, strategies that could turn the tide in our favor. But it's useless without someone who understands humans, someone who can adapt it to your needs. Elias hesitated, staring at the sphere. Why me? He asked quietly. There are smarter people, stronger people. Why trust this to me? Caliph. Gaze hardened, though not unkindly. Because you're willing to ask questions. Because you refuse to accept things as they are. And because, despite everything, you still care? Her words struck a chord deep within him. Care, that was it, wasn't it? Humanity's greatest strength wasn't its weapons or its intellect. It was its capacity to care, to hope, to dream of a better future, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Taking a deep breath, Elias reached out and took the sphere from her hand. It felt warm to the touch, almost alive. What happens now? He asked. Caliph straightened, her expression shifting back to its usual intensity. Now, you return to Nova Terra, you share this knowledge with your people, you show them what's possible. And then what? Elias pressed. We declare war? Start a rebellion? No, Caliph said firmly, not yet. First, you build trust, unity. You remind your people of who they are and what they're capable of. Only then will you be ready. Before Elias could respond, alarms blared throughout the outpost. Red warning lights flashed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. Caliph's head snapped toward the door, her body tensing instantly. They found us, she growled. Elias's heart sank. Who? The Veil? She spat, already moving toward the exit. They must have traced my portal. We don't have much time. Panic surged through Elias. What do we do? Caliph grabbed his arm, her grip firm but urgent. You leave. Now take the sphere and go. I'll hold them off. What? No. Elias protested, pulling away. I'm not leaving you here. You don't have a choice, Caliph snapped, her voice sharp but laced with something else, something softer, resolve. Your survival matters more than mine? Humanity needs you. My people need you. For a moment, Elias wanted to argue, to insist on staying. But looking into her glowing eyes, he saw the truth. This wasn't about pride or heroics, it was about purpose, about doing what needed to be done. All right, he said finally, clutching the sphere tightly, but promise me one thing. Keleth raised an eyebrow. What? That you'll survive this, Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. We're not done yet. A flicker of amusement crossed her face, quickly replaced by determination. I make no promises, she said, but I'll do my best. With that, she shoved him toward a nearby escape pod. Go, she commanded, and remember, trust yourself, trust your people. That's how we win. As the pod launched into space, Elias looked back at the outpost, now engulfed in flashes of light and explosions. His chest tightened, torn between fear and resolve. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear: the game had changed. Humanity was no longer just a footnote in the galactic ledger. It was a spark waiting to ignite. Elias returned to Nova Terra under the cover of darkness, slipping through the shadows like a ghost. The escape pod had brought him back to familiar territory, but nothing felt the same anymore. He carried the crystalline sphere, a beacon of hope and responsibility tucked safely inside his jacket. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the enormity of what lay ahead. The colony was eerily quiet, its usual hum of activity muted by fear. Since Keleth's appearance and subsequent disappearance, the veil had tightened. Their grip on Nova Terra, curfews were enforced with brutal efficiency. Patrols roamed the streets at all hours, and anyone caught violating protocol faced swift punishment. The air was thick with tension, as if everyone knew something big was coming, but no one dared speak of it. Elias made his way to an abandoned maintenance tunnel beneath the main facility. It was a place he'd discovered years ago, hidden away from prying eyes. Over time, he'd turned it into a makeshift sanctuary, a space where he could think without interruption. Now, it would serve as his base of operations. Inside the dimly lit tunnel, Elias placed the crystalline sphere on a makeshift table and activated it. The device sprang to life, projecting holographic images into the air blueprints for advanced technology, strategies for guerrilla warfare, and detailed maps of Veil infrastructure. As he studied the data, a mix of awe and dread washed over him. This was more than just information, it was a weapon, a tool that could change everything. But how could he convince others to trust him? How could he rally humanity when most were too afraid to even whisper against the Veil? The answer came unexpectedly the next day. While scavenging supplies from the colony's storage units, Elias ran into someone he hadn't seen in months: Myra Torres, a former colleague and close friend. Myra had always been outspoken, fiery, and fiercely loyal. When the Veil crackdown began, she'd vanished, presumed arrested or worse. Yet here she was, alive and determined. Elias? Myra whispered, her eyes widening in disbelief. Is that you? Myra, Elias exclaimed, relief flooding his voice. I didn't know what happened to you. She gave him a wry smile, though her expression remained guarded. Let's just say I've been laying low. What about you? You look like you've seen better days. Before Elias could respond, Myra noticed the faint glow of the crystalline sphere peeking out from his jacket pocket. Her brow furrowed. What's that? Elias hesitated, unsure whether to trust her. But something in her gaze, sharp, unyielding, reminded him of why they'd become friends in the first place. She wasn't the type to shy away from danger. It's complicated, Elias admitted, but it might be our only chance to fight back. Over the next hour, he explained everything: the Zern, Keleth, the impending war, and the knowledge contained within the sphere. Myra listened intently, her initial skepticism giving way to determination. By the end of his explanation, her fists were clenched and her jaw was set. We're doing this, she said firmly. Whatever it takes? With Myra's help, Elias began spreading the word cautiously, reaching out to trusted allies across the colony. They held secret meetings in hidden corners of Nova Terra, sharing fragments of the sphere's knowledge and rallying support. Slowly but surely, a network of resistance formed. People who had once accepted their oppression as inevitable now saw a glimmer of hope. For the first time in decades, humanity began to stir, but the Veil weren't blind to the growing unrest. Whispers of rebellion reached their ears, and they responded with ruthless efficiency. Raids became more frequent, arrests more brutal. Anyone suspected of dissent disappeared overnight, never to be seen again. One evening, during a covert meeting in the tunnels, disaster struck. A group of Veil soldiers stormed the hideout, their weapons drawn. Chaos erupted as the humans scrambled. To escape, Elias and Mara barely made it out alive, narrowly avoiding capture as the tunnel collapsed behind them, breathing heavily. Elias leaned against a wall, his mind racing. "They're onto us," he muttered grimly. "If we don't act. Soon, they'll crush us before we even begin." Myra nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Then we hit them where it hurts. We strike fast, hard, and unexpected." Elias looked at her, seeing not just a friend but a leader, someone who understood the stakes and was willing to risk everything. Together, they devised a plan, a daring assault on one of the Veil's key communication hubs. If successful, it would disrupt their control over Nova Terra and buy humanity precious time to organize further. The night of the attack arrived, cloaked in darkness and storm clouds. Dozens of humans gathered in the shadows, armed with crude weapons fashioned from scavenged parts and guided by the sphere's tactical data. Elias stood at the forefront, his heart pounding, but his resolve unwavering. As they approached the hub, the Veil guards spotted them immediately. Alarms blared and gunfire erupted. The battle was fierce and chaotic, each side fighting with desperation. Humans fell, but for every casualty, two more stepped forward, driven by a shared purpose. In the midst of the chaos, Elias found himself face to face with a Veil commander. The alien sneered, raising its weapon. "You're wasting your lives," it hissed. "You'll never win." Elias hesitated for a split second, then lunged forward, tackling the commander to the ground. "Maybe not," he growled. "But we're going to try." The hub was eventually breached, its systems disabled. Though the cost was high, the victory galvanized the colonists. Word spread quickly, inspiring others to join the fight. Humanity was rising, not as individuals, but as a united force, yet amidst the triumph, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Veil would retaliate, and the true test was yet to come. Still, as he watched the survivors regroup under the shattered moonlight, he felt a spark of pride in something else, hope. The days following the assault on the Veil communication hub were a whirlwind of chaos and triumph. News of the successful attack spread like wildfire across Nova Terra, igniting a firestorm of rebellion that no one, not even Elias, had anticipated. Humans who had once cowered in fear now stood tall, emboldened by the realization that they could fight back. Resistance cells sprang up everywhere, coordinated through encrypted channels powered by the crystalline sphere's technology. For the first time in decades, humanity wasn't just surviving, it was fighting, but the Veil weren't idle. Their response was swift and merciless. Entire sections of the colony were locked down, their inhabitants subjected to brutal interrogations. Patrols doubled, then tripled, sweeping through streets with ruthless efficiency. The air grew heavier with each passing hour as the Veil tightened their grip. Determined to crush the uprising before it could gain momentum, Elias knew this was only the beginning. The initial victory had been a spark, but sustaining the flame would require more than courage. It would demand ingenuity, sacrifice, and unity. He gathered his closest allies, Mara included, in the tunnels beneath the facility. Together, they pored over the sphere's data, searching for an edge, something that could turn the tide in their favor. "We need to hit them harder," Myra urged, her voice sharp with frustration. "Every day we wait gives them time to regroup." "No," Elias replied, rubbing his temples. "But we can't afford another direct assault. We're outnumbered, outgunned. We have to be smarter." As he spoke, one of the holographic projections caught his eye, a schematic of the Veil's Central Command Center. It was heavily fortified, guarded by layers of security systems and elite soldiers. But buried within the design was a vulnerability, a single power conduit running beneath the structure. If they could disable it, the entire facility would go dark, crippling the Veil's ability to coordinate their forces. It's risky, Myra said after Elias explained the plan. If we fail, they'll retaliate with everything they've got. Then we don't fail, Elias shot back, his tone firm. This is our chance to show them and ourselves that we're not just victims. We're survivors. The operation required precision and stealth. A small team would infiltrate the underground network leading to the power conduit, while the rest of the resistance staged diversions to draw attention away from the target. Elias volunteered to lead the infiltration team despite Myra's protests. You're too valuable, she argued. If you get caught, if I don't go, who will? Elias interrupted. This isn't about me or you. It's about giving humanity a future, and that starts now. Reluctantly, Myra agreed. As dawn broke, the teams moved into position. The diversions began with a series of coordinated attacks on key Veil installations, drawing patrols and reinforcements away from the command center. Meanwhile, Elias and his team slipped into the shadows, navigating the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the facility. The journey was harrowing. Every step felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. Sensors buzzed faintly. Overhead, and automated drones patrolled the corridors, forcing the team to move slowly and carefully. Tension hung thick in the air, each member acutely aware of the stakes. Finally, they reached the power conduit, a massive cable pulsing with energy encased in reinforced plating. Using tools adapted from the sphere's designs, Elias worked quickly to disable the protective shielding. Sweat dripped down his face as he focused, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Hurry, whispered one of the team members, keeping watch at the entrance. I hear movement. I'm almost done, Elias muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. With a final click, the shielding disengaged, exposing the conduit. He placed a small explosive charger prototype developed using Zern technology and set the timer. Let's move, he ordered, grabbing his gear and retreating toward the exit. They barely made it out before the charge detonated, sending a shockwave rippling through the tunnels. Above ground, the command center went dark, its lights flickering off one by one. For a moment, there was silence, a stunned pause as the Veil scrambled to respond. Then chaos erupted. Without centralized coordination, their forces faltered, leaving them vulnerable. Across Nova Terra, the Resistance seized the opportunity, launching simultaneous strikes against weakened positions. The tide had turned amidst the commotion. Elias found himself outside the command center, watching the Veil's once impenetrable fortress crumble. His chest heaved with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with determination. This wasn't just a tactical victory, it was proof that humanity could rise above despair and reclaim its destiny. As the dust settled, a figure emerged from the shadows. Keleth, her iridescent scales glimmered faintly in the dim light, her expression unreadable. She approached Elias, stopping just a few feet away. You did it? She said simply, her voice devoid of mockery or condescension. Instead, there was something else, respect. You proved what I suspected all along. What's that? Elias asked, meeting her gaze. That your greatest strength isn't logic or power? Keleth replied. It's connection. Your ability to unite, to care for each other, for freedom, that's what makes you dangerous. Elias nodded, feeling a swell of pride not just for himself, but for everyone who had fought alongside him. Humanity wasn't perfect, but it was resilient. Flawed, yet unyielding. Keleth stepped closer, her glowing eyes softening slightly. You've earned my trust, she admitted quietly, and perhaps my respect. Before Elias could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the air. Reinforcements were coming, the Veil wouldn't surrender so easily. But for now, the humans had won. And for the first time, Keleth saw them not as pests, but as equals. The battle for Nova Terra became a turning point, not just for the colony, but for the entire galaxy. The Veil, once seen as invincible overlords, were now reeling from the unexpected ferocity of humanity's resistance. Word of the uprising spread across star systems, carried by whispers among traders, smugglers, and rebels. Other colonies under Veil control began to stir, emboldened by Nova Terra's defiance. Humanity was no longer an afterthought. It was a force to be reckoned with. In the weeks that followed, Elias and his allies worked tirelessly to consolidate their gains. They established hidden outposts, fortified defenses, and continued to adapt Zern technology to suit human needs. Though the Veil launched counterattacks, their efforts were disjointed and ineffective without centralized command. Slowly but surely, humanity carved out pockets of freedom in places where oppression had once been absolute. Calith remained a constant presence during this time, her role shifting from mentor to ally. She no longer spoke of humans with disdain or dismissal. Instead, she observed them, studying their ingenuity, their resilience, their ability to find hope even in the darkest moments. Her interactions with Elias grew more frequent, though they were often marked by a quiet tension. Despite her growing respect for humanity, Caliph still struggled to reconcile her initial prejudice with what she now saw. One evening, as the twin moons of Nova Terra cast silver light over the landscape, Elias found himself sitting beside Caliph on a rocky outcrop overlooking the colony. The air was cool, and the distant hum of activity provided a comforting backdrop to their silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You've changed," Elias said finally, breaking the quiet. Caliph tilted her head, her glowing eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Have I?" Elias nodded. "When we first met, you called us weak, flawed, a waste of space. Now," he gestured toward the bustling colony below, "now you're helping." "U.S. fight?" Caliph let out a soft chuckle, though there was no mockery in it. "Perhaps I underestimated you," she admitted. "I saw your emotions as weaknesses, your chaos as inefficiency. But I was wrong. Why do you think that is?" Elias asked gently. "What made you change your mind?" Caliph paused, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "It wasn't one thing," she said slowly. "It was everything. The way you refused to give up even when all seemed lost. The way you stood together not because you were ordered to, but because you chose to. You fight not just for survival, but for something greater. Something intangible." "Hope," Elias offered quietly. "Yes," Caliph agreed. "Hope. It's infuriating and inspiring." Elias smiled faintly, feeling a strange sense of pride. "We're not perfect," he said. "But maybe that's why we keep trying. Because we know we can be better." Caliph turned to look at him, her expression unreadable yet somehow softer than before. "You're still reckless?" she teased lightly. "Still unpredictable, still human, and you still hate us a little, don't you?" Elias joked, raising an eyebrow. Caliph smirked, though her tone carried a hint of sincerity. "Perhaps. But hatred isn't the same as disrespect. And I can't deny that your kind has earned my admiration." Before Elias could respond, a sudden wave of exhaustion washed over him. The months of relentless struggle, the sleepless nights, the endless strategizing, the weight of leadership finally caught up with him. Without realizing it, his eyelids began to droop. He leaned back against the rock, the rhythmic hum of the colony lulling him into a daze. Caliph noticed immediately. "You're tired," she observed, her voice tinged with amusement. "Even now, you push yourself beyond your limits." "I'm fine," Elias mumbled, though his words lacked conviction. His head lolled slightly, and before he could stop himself, he slumped sideways right onto Caliph's shoulder. For a moment, Caliph froze, clearly unsure how to react. Then, almost imperceptibly, her posture relaxed. She didn't move him or push him away. Instead, she simply sat there, allowing him to rest. "You humans are strange," she murmured, her tone softer than ever. "So fragile, yet so determined. So flawed, yet so hopeful." Elias didn't hear her. He was already asleep, his breathing slow and steady. Caliph glanced down at him, her glowing eyes flickering with something akin to affection or perhaps understanding. Whatever it was unspoken, lingering in the quiet moments between them. As the night deepened, the stars above seemed brighter than usual, casting their light over a world transformed. Humanity had risen not through perfection, but through perseverance, through connection. Through hope. And somewhere, amid the chaos and courage, Kelleth realized she had found something she hadn't expected, a reason to believe in more than logic, in more than efficiency, in something inherently, beautifully human.